In a universe filled with superheroes, giant robots, monsters, and space warriors, there was one character that somehow managed to conquer the entire planet. And he always lived in a pineapple under the sea.
I'm ready!
Now, if you grew up in the early 2000s, you know who exactly I'm talking about. Because for a brief moment, SpongeBob wasn't just a cartoon. He was everywhere. So today I want to go back in time when one yellow sponge completely dominated Nickelodeon and practically ruled the entire 2000s. But before we dive deep into that, let's take a look back at the GOAT himself, Stephen Hillenburg. Before SpongeBob existed, Stephen Hillenburg was actually a marine biology teacher at an ocean institute in California. In 1989, he created an educational comic called The Intertidal Zone. It was to teach kids about tide pool creatures and marine life. One of the characters was actually Bob the Sponge. He was actually, when you think about it, an early prototype of SpongeBob. He wasn't even square at the time. He was just a circular little ball, like a sponge. What I find very interesting though is that in this early comic, you can see the early concept about future characters that would actually be in the SpongeBob show. I mean, look at the sea cucumber. That's literally Kevin the cucumber.
Hi, Kevin. I'm your biggest fan.
You're too kind.
Security!
The characters did have this almost hyper-realistic look in a sense, which matches what he does later on with the show with those close-up images. Now, however, after leaving teaching, he started working on Rocko's Modern Life. Hillenburg was actually encouraged by writer Martin Olson to turn his ocean-themed comic ideas into a cartoon. However, when Nickelodeon executives saw the concept, they reportedly wanted SpongeBob to be a child attending school. Of course, Hillenburg strongly wanted him to be an adult with a job. The compromise to that became Mrs. Puff's boarding school, allowing SpongeBob to be an adult while still attending a school setting. When you really think about it, it kind of makes sense. Even to this day, as many times SpongeBob gets his license, he always goes back to Mrs. Puff.
Oh, SpongeBob, why?
Mrs. Puff, I think I cheated.
My leg!
The original title of the series was actually SpongeBoy Ahoy. However, after the show was pitched, Nickelodeon's legal team department discovered that the name SpongeBoy was already trademarked and in use. Hillenburg was forced to change it, but he wanted to keep the word sponge in there. Eventually, we all know that the name landed into SpongeBob. And just like that, on May 1st of 1999, SpongeBob debuted its first episode called Help Wanted. And this episode literally knocked it off the park. I mean, when you really think about it, it introduced you to the four main core characters. You had SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs. Sandy would also later get introduced, but you already got a vibe for this show, and it was amazing. Nobody knew how big this show was going to be in Nickelodeon. It literally exploded. And in a way, the official mascot at the time. Look how timeless and whimsical that first episode feels like. I love how SpongeBob used to look back then. I mean, hell, when you see the anchovies destroying the Krusty Krab, look at that still image right there. That looks like a Renaissance painting. I would literally hang that up on my wall, just like Bold and Brash.
Belongs in the trash!
Sorry, I must have missed that one.
I think why this show worked so well compared to all the Nickelodeon shows that they had is just this wasn't just geared towards kids. It had smart humor. You go back and look at SpongeBob now and you still laugh at it. In fact, you even find it funnier because it was also geared towards adults in a very smart way. I think that's why when we ever feel down or it's just like a rainy day or something, it feels so good to just put SpongeBob in, at least the first 3 seasons. And while other shows try to make certain things in there very unique, for example, Ed and Eddie, which I love a lot, had the Jawbreakers, but SpongeBob did something very different. He introduced Krabby Patties, a burger. And we all know as a kid, we always wanted to just have a Krabby Patty. It's literally the life goal. And still to this day, we still want that. The characters all bounced off from each other so well. There was never one that was better than the other one. Even the smaller characters that you would see showing up later on in the series had a good impactful moment. I mean, look at Old Man Jenkins. He is a running gag in the show. And then of course you have the iconic My Leg, and it was used perfectly back then. Now it's just kind of overused a little bit.
Rev up those fryers, cause I am sure hungry for one. Help! Help!
My leg! Can't you see we're closed?
Something that doesn't get talked about a lot in shows is the soundtrack, especially for a kids TV show. The soundtrack for this is just iconic. I mean, we all know the Krusty Krab theme. We also know the Police's theme, which every time I get pulled over, I always play that in my head. I don't know, don't blame me. I have a real problem when things are very serious. I tend to laugh things out a lot.
Huh?
Then we had Pretty Patties, and how about those jellyfishes? Did any of you ever remember watching the episode when SpongeBob is making a Krabby Patty with jelly, and the guy was singing and tap dancing, basically explaining that this was the greatest things that he's ever had? Well, how many of you, when you had a sandwich, you put jelly in there, and you would put in your mind that that was actually jellyfish jelly? But I always wanted to try that blue jellyfish. You guys know what I'm talking about? But did any of you ever put jelly in a burger? I've always been curious about that.
Hi, can I get a plain hamburger?
Alrighty then, well, we have a Krabby Patty here with jellyfish jelly. It's actually blueberry, but you know, let's give it a go. You know, SpongeBob was cooking on this. This is actually not that bad. And then they had some really iconic episodes like the Nasty Patty, which basically had SpongeBob, in a sense, try to get away with murder. I always feel like SpongeBob worked really well when it came to those horror elements, especially with like the soundtrack. It did match really well. I mean, how about the Hashling and Slasher?
Nosferatu!
But one that I feel like had the greatest impact of all was Bang Geeks. I mean, hell, we finally got them to play in the Super Bowl later on. But with all those amazing episodes, they even killed it with the holiday specials. We had the Halloween episode and the Christmas special, which the Christmas special would become a staple for me in the holidays to watch it every year. I mean, me and my sister would watch that regularly, and we would just be holding hands, singing like SpongeBob and Patrick. It was some good times. By the way, did you know that I didn't know that Patchy the Pirate was actually Tom Kenny for the longest time? They did, however, abandon an episode, which is the Panty Raid episode, and I feel like that's pretty stupid compared to a lot of things that would show on TV. That wasn't really that big of a deal. It's just, I guess people are just too soft some of these days, which is why physical media will always be king, guys. Listen, I love SpongeBob so much that I had a SpongeBob bedroom from elementary school all the way to high school. And you're asking, was I popular with the ladies? Well, no. With the show ongoing, of course, there was going to be multiple amounts of merchandise. And I remember them having cheese nips of SpongeBob. Do you guys remember that? I would always prefer cheese nips over Cheez-Its at the time, just because it had SpongeBob in it, of course. There were gummies that I remember SpongeBob was like orange, and they would like stretch him up completely. Those gummies tasted good, by the way. They also had SpongeBob cereal that had marshmallows in them, like the Jellyfish, SpongeBob, Patrick. But Burger King was the big one for SpongeBob. They had SpongeBob toys everywhere. I remember trying to collect them all with my cousins. I think Burger King and SpongeBob have had this relationship going on for the longest because they released that Krabby Patty meal, and I mean, I went ahead and got it with actually my good friend Mike's movie room. But it was awesome just trying to have the Krabby Patty as an adult, and it just shows you how big SpongeBob is. It was so huge that we even got a bounce house themed of SpongeBob. Now, while SpongeBob ruled television, he was also everywhere in video games. We had games like Super Sponge for the PlayStation 1, Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, which was the first SpongeBob game that actually had you at least go around Bikini Bottom in a sense. I always find that game very nostalgic for some reason. I'm not sure why. The soundtrack I always liked, the Bikini Bottom one. It was a little clunky, but it was still pretty good. However, the greatest SpongeBob game to this day that has ever been made is SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom. Now, SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, I actually ended up getting it for Christmas. All the gifts were wrapped in SpongeBob wrapping paper. The one thing I also remember is because in that time, the power went off for the entire block on Christmas Day. So I couldn't play the game until late nighttime on Christmas. I love this game so much. I would call it one of the greatest platformers ever. I mean, they put in so much detail in this game. I mean, you could really go around the entire Bikini Bottom at the time. You can visit people's houses. You can go to downtown Bikini Bottom, Jellyfish Fields, Rock Bottom, and the details in that game were amazing. When SpongeBob goes in Sandy's tree dome and he's literally suffocating because he can't have water, the fact that they put that in there in that game was fantastic. I mean, the game was so huge that it even got a remake, later called Rehydrated. Then in 2004 came SpongeBob SquarePants the movie. Now, this also did have a tie-in game that played very similar to Battle for Bikini Bottom, and it was more linear and focused more on the story of the movie. Still pretty dang good game. However, that movie's success was amazing. It was basically, in a sense, the original canon ending of the series. At least that's what Stephen wanted, but of course Nickelodeon wanted more SpongeBob, so we ended up getting more of that. But you can definitely feel that this was the end game. I mean, SpongeBob became the manager for the Krusty Krab, they defeated Plankton, and saved Bikini Bottom. But I feel like they should have kept it right there. However, here's the thing, I was a badass kid, I'm not gonna lie to you. When I had that movie in DVD, I actually played it in my Xbox, and I had a balcony, right? So I opened the doors to the balcony, and I would crank up the volume so high where they start playing the Goofy Goober song. I thought I was the coolest coolest kid in the entire neighborhood. We also had a game called Lights, Camera, Pants, and Action, and this game, I would say, had the most replay value for me as a kid because it was basically Mario Party, but SpongeBob. Now, Creature for the Krusty Krab, I actually only played the DS version of it, but there were other games that came out for the DS, which was Atlantis SquarePants, Drawn to Life, The Yellow Avenger. Was talking about SpongeBob on the Go, what about the Game Boy Advance games? I mean, they even had a Game Boy Advance SP SpongeBob edition, which I actually ended up getting it for Christmas. It was actually a Toys R Us exclusive.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha!
SpongeBob, come on! I'm going to pretend that didn't happen.
That core show, those first 3 seasons and the movie are untouchable. We have adults throwing SpongeBob parties, referencing the show, and just in a way, connecting and making friends with people still. And all this would never happen without Steven's creative genius. He sadly passed away in 2018, but the world he created continues to make people laugh, introduce new generations to SpongeBob, and remind so many of us of, well, a simpler time. And if you guys enjoy these type of videos that we take a look back at certain eras, movies, or even pop culture in general, go ahead and check out the rest of the channel. And remember guys, like Patrick says, the higher the pinky, the fancier you are.